Welcome to the Badger Politics. I'm Scott Stearns.
Good evening, this is Paul.
Hey, Paul.
Paul's sick.
What's going on?
Well, we've been always talking about the Brewers at the beginning of our podcasts.
Hey, they're right there in the mix.
Once again, they have they're on their way to completing their third straight winning season. In fact, they've guaranteed it.
Yes, they have guaranteed it, and they are tied for the wild card as of today with the Chicago Cubs.
There are numerous scenarios in which a Game 163 will be played involving the Brewers.
And if it were to be played against the Cubs, it would be a repeat of last year, except for the fact that it would be at Miller Park, not Wrigley Field.
And frankly, the odds of the Cubs and Brewers each going 5-5 or 6-4 or 7-3 the rest of the way are pretty high.
Could very well happen. Although the strength of schedule for the Cubs is harder. They have 7 games against the Cardinals. Mm-hmm. Remaining Cardinals are taking the division as of now. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how that plays
Brewers
out.
are a little more road heavy. I mean, there's a lot of factors here that obviously the Brewers don't have their best player, which is
they're also not playing against any contenders though, which is
right. And they're getting some of their pitching back, which has been a big source of confusion. I did expect them to compete. Yeah. I just didn't expect them to compete without Christian Yelich.
They've got some pitching back. They have Keston Hiura back in the lineup as well. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's 100% or anything, but having his bat in the mix is not going to hurt their cause.
I mean, a clear-eyed person would say, look for the Brewers to go 5-5 or less, mm-hmm. and basically return the mean post Christian Yelich injury. Yeah. And that may be the case, and maybe we saw some signs of it tonight with the one-run output. Yasmani Grandal, I don't think, has had a hit yet in this series against the Padres at home. So there are signs that maybe this run could be coming to an end. But it's been a great run, and they're in it despite really the odds here at this point in the season.
And the fact that they're actually in a pennant race and they're having another winning season.
You want to talk business?
Speaking of horse races, we've got the other one that's in the mix, which is the Democratic primary. Yeah. And they just had a debate.
The POTUS.
This past week
ago or so.
We had Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, Beto O'Rourke, and Andrew Yang all debate. Mm-hmm. I watched it in a
smaller, more appropriately sized stage.
It was
for sure
better. You had really the contenders all on the same stage for a change, because it's really a 5-person race right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, based on everything we're looking at. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. Mm-hmm. And the rest are single digits or zero. As far as where things go from here, one of the things we talked about before we started recording here is the question you threw out, which is, what should the Democrats be talking about? What should be at the top of the agenda? I mean,
and I'm quoting a 538 discussion that was posted, I believe, today or yesterday.
Okay.
Well, I thought that was a really good discussion, actually, and they did some polling, and the number one issue among Democratic voters in the primary was ability to beat Donald Trump, and that had a 4-to-1 ratio almost over the second issue, which was health care.
Okay.
So it was 39.6%, both before and after the debate, actually, said that the most important issue is the ability to beat Trump. 11% after the debate and only 10% before the debate said health care. That was the second most important issue. The economy was got 9%. Wealth and income inequality, which I guess you could lump in with the economy, 8%.
Yeah, that's an aspect of it.
Climate change, 7. Gun policy, 5. Immigration, 4. Something else, 4. Then Social Security, education, racism, the makeup of the Supreme Court. This is why we keep losing our battles in the court. The Democrats are not in tune.
It's not as high of a priority.
I would have that way up there. Yeah. Taxes, jobs, foreign affairs, crime, the military, and sexism. Okay. I mean, and some of these, like I said just earlier about the economy and wealth and inequality, but some of these things run with each other.
They're all interrelated to some extent, but the whole
some more than others.
The whole beat Trump aspect being the number one, according to
4-to-1 over any other issue.
Well, I mean that's
even if you put the economy and wealth together, it's more than 2-to-1.
Sure. Well, I mean I guess that shouldn't be surprising given the current political climate, and it's not unlike what occurred in the stacked primary against Mr. Walker here in Wisconsin for governor. So you had Tony Evers and you had numerous other candidates that had varying levels of enthusiasm and constituencies behind them. At the end of the day, Tony Evers won because he had the name recognition as the state superintendent of public schools. And he wasn't as dynamic as some of the other candidates, but he won out of name recognition and the fact that he had a track record of succeeding politically at the polls statewide.
I think anytime you have the out party in a primary, and unfortunately this time it's the Democrats, you're always going to have the ability to beat the opponent is the number one issue.
Yeah.
The fact that it's 4-1, I guess, means something, except in some ways I'm surprised it's not 8-1.
Right.
Any of the other issues after that that are mentioned, you can't accomplish them if you can't beat Trump.
That's true. And the most recent Marquette poll kind of backs up that if you believe that Biden is the guy or the most the consensus candidate, I guess,
most
right now. So the Marquette poll numbers have Joe Biden beating Donald Trump as of a few weeks ago, 51-42. Bernie Sanders is 48-44. Warren is tied with Trump. This is in Wisconsin.
45?
Warren, 45. Trump, 45. And then Harris and Trump tied at 44. They didn't do a head-to-head with Pete Buttigieg. He did place, I think... in
fourth, he placed ahead of Harris.
He
right?
did.
Among primary
in the Marquette poll for the Democratic primary in Wisconsin, Biden's leading with 28% of the vote. Sanders has 20. Elizabeth Warren has 17. And Pete has 6. Kamala Harris has 3. And it kind of drops off from there in terms of single digits.
What's interesting to me is Marquette typically underpolls minorities. They typically overpoll whites with college educations. So they have an interesting, the whites with college educations, they tends to bias a little more Democratic, but underpolling minorities tends to bias toward Republicans, and that's maybe how Marquette always comes up with a balance. It's like their biases tend to cancel each other out in the big picture. But within the primary, it's interesting because nationally, Biden is not doing too well with well-educated whites. He has almost the same numbers nationally that he had in the Marquette poll. He's being propped up to that 30% plurality, mostly by very strong support among black voters.
Yes.
Mostly, not because he was, at least this is what I've started to hear anecdotally. I think that, in like follow-up questions.
Not just because he was Obama's vice president.
Not just because he was Obama's vice president, because he's a known quantity who people feel can beat Trump.
Okay.
And I mean, that's really where I think if you look at the crosstabs, right, who believes the most important issue is the ability to beat Trump, you're going to see that it's very strong among black voters or other minorities, too. The people with the most at stake, frankly, I think.
Sure.
And it does seem to be, that is well known nationally, is that seems to be all the focus groups are coming back with minority voters, blacks in particular, tend to favor Biden because they see him as the most realistic chance.
Okay. As we've talked about, Biden, I think in many polls is the stand-in for a generic Democrat, just based on name recognition, history, etc. So, I mean, take that into account. Added to that, you look at the top three really are Biden, Bernie, and Warren right now. Now, Bernie and Warren are splitting the progressive vote.
Right.
So if one of them were to drop out, which is not going to happen, it would probably
push. By the time
push.
it gets to Wisconsin, that could easily happen.
Yeah, it would push one of them probably potentially ahead of Biden.
But if you were to put Bernie and Elizabeth Warren together, right, you do have a formidable force against Biden, even here in Wisconsin.
And that kind of represents where a good chunk of the party is at right now, I think, in terms of the progressive viewpoint, right?
The other thing that's interesting, too, is, Wisconsin is ground zero in the general election. It really is almost an afterthought in the primary.
Just given where it lands?
Yeah, it's like 80% of the delegates, I believe, are chosen before.
Well,
so you would have to
California's moved up this next cycle, too, so that's going to be
New York, too.
Yeah.
So. I mean, you would have to have a real tight contest like we had in 2008. The odds are the thing will pretty much be sewn up, or it'll be down to one or two people. Maybe we will have one or the other, Warren or Sanders up against Biden and maybe one other candidate. And so the idea that like Wisconsin voters would face this sort of choice is kind of a red herring in a way. So maybe Wisconsin polling in the primary is almost meaningless, other than just kind of a beauty contest right now.
Well, we'll see. But again, I think it comes down to what are they going to be talking about this fall, this winter, and spring when these contests really ramp up. In the debates, the topics have been pretty consistent. It's immigration, it's healthcare, it's climate change. I mean, these have been kind of the common themes.
Right.
I feel like there's some space in here that's available to candidates to really dig into the economy and kind of where things are going. The market right now has been pretty static. There are leading indicators that show that we are ripe for the market to take a dive. What impact does that have on the upcoming recession? And so
Trump promised in 2016 with a similarly strong economy. No, he promised to make the economy work for working people.
Yeah, that had
it was
lip service.
Well, that's the point.
Yes.
Right? The numbers in 2016 were at least as good as they are today.
Yes.
They were about the same, basically.
Bottom line is, the economy is headed in a direction where a lot of forecasts are spelling out at least a level of doom ahead. You add to that the fact that interest rates have been slashed to an extent where you really can't do much if you're
pressuring them
to cut them more.
Right?
And then if you actually enter
the bull market going,
of course, at least through next year, right? But the thing is, if you slash interest rates to next to nothing, you don't have any tools left really to stimulate the economy when it does go into recession.
Like we said, overall, the basic economic numbers that you look at, they look pretty good. And they looked pretty good about 4 years ago. But working people weren't feeling it. And working people, I don't think, are feeling it yet. And yet there's a good sense that the futures numbers don't look too great.
Right. So I think
prospective numbers, whereas in 2016 there was no sense at all that the prospective numbers didn't look good.
Exactly. So I think when you're asking the question about what should the Democrats be talking about, I think it has to be, yes, you talk about healthcare, yes, you talk about climate change. These are critical issues. But when you're talking about bread and butter issues, of which healthcare is one of them, you have to tie that into the direction the economy is going in and what that means for wealth and income inequality.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Absolutely.
And the answer to that question is not unambiguous.
Yeah.
It's like,
I got that tax cut,
Right. Well, the billionaires did. I mean, they'll say yes for sure.
Right. I got my breadcrumbs.
They probably put enough of them in their convention hall in Charlotte, but to make it sound like yes. But overall, the feeling probably is about, at best, it's about the same.
Yeah.
And it really, which means at best, it's an unfulfilled promise by Trump to not make it felt further down the line.
Yeah.
And to the extent that it has been felt further down the line, I would credit efforts like Obamacare to keep Obamacare there that has actually prevented medical bankruptcies. The Fight for 15, which has actually substantially had an impact on 22 million people, helping raise their wages by about an average of $1.15 an hour. There have been things where it's improved. I just wanted to go back to the Wisconsin primary, and I actually think one of the reasons also Biden does well in Wisconsin, it's not demographic, it's that most focus in Wisconsin, because you have the convention coming here, and everybody knows it's probably going to be the closest swing state. It's the new Florida, right?
Sure.
It's
the new Ohio, really.
Right. It's whatever those big states were in the past. That's us now. Everybody in Wisconsin is thinking, how do we win the general? So that's, I think, probably biasing the sense of who they want in a primary. So, yeah, you know what? Biden is still probably, for the casual observer, seen as the safest money to win the general.
Yeah.
And so that's probably influencing that choice.
Yeah. Obviously, as we get deeper into this thing and more folks start to drop out, we can start talking about what makes sense in terms of a ticket. If it's Warren, is it Pete Buttigieg as a VP? If it's Biden, does he put Warren on the ticket? I don't know. I don't think
the hour or so we spent talking before this podcast tonight, I declared myself from being an undecided voter to leaning Biden to then leaning
Pete
Buttigieg. And before I actually showed up, I was thinking Warren. So,
So you're probably the average Democratic voter right now.
In the last few hours, What's very reassuring to me is I live in Wisconsin, so most likely I won't really get a meaningful vote on this.
Well, we shall see.
I'll be voting on the Supreme Court and making sure Scott Walker's one of his appointees doesn't win another term.
On that note, forward, folks.
Yeah, forward.